Good day, and welcome to Donald Ransford's Weekly Wraps. I am Web Governor, and as usual, what we'll do is we'll start with the general market segment and end up with a AI/tech segment. In a general market segment, you look at the following things. Firstly, let's in Trump world, then US inflation, and then in our AI segment, we're going to look at JD Vance's recent speech, basically to an AI safety seminar or conference in the EU. And also, we will look at the upcoming release of Grok 3. So, in the Trump world, reciprocal tariffs. Trump has come up with the idea of reciprocal tariffs. That means basically he will look at whatever tariffs are being applied to US goods and services internationally and apply them on anything imported from that particular country. Now, that doesn't sound too bad. I mean, you could say, okay, that kind of makes sense. If you're going to tariff my cars, I'll tariff your stuff. You do a 10% tariff on my things, I'll put a 10% tariff on your things. It sounds fair. Unfortunately, it goes beyond just this, because his interpretation of tariffs includes things like that. He's also looking at things like, some of the regulations around, for instance, the regulations that the EU has with regards to, internet safety, etc. But just look at the VAT thing alone. I mean, that makes a big difference, because, VAT is in some of these countries 20%. So we are looking at, a substantial tariff being put on US goods coming to the country up front. That is going to be a major impediment to many of the countries that basically US trades with, especially in Europe. So I do think that this is going to be quite significant, and we've been seeing the UK, which I thought it's going to escape a lot of these tariff issues, because they actually had a trade deficit with the US. So they basically sell less to the US than they buy from the US. But if this is the case, then they are going to experience some difficulty going forward. At the same time, the Canadians are also basically going to be, hard hit by this kind of move as well. And in fact, in a funny tweet, Justin Trudeau came out and basically lobbied for free trade. Well, free trade between who? Between Canada. That's right. The Canadians don't have free trade between their provinces. As amazing as that might seem, you cannot. Basically, there are significant barriers to trade between the different Canadian provinces. So maybe this might actually, get Canada out of the kind of recent issues it has had with regards to low growth, etc. If we can make them do things that are basically no-brainers, like allowing them to trade with themselves without any of these impediments. So now moving on to inflation, we had some US inflation numbers coming out, slightly higher than anticipated. Both PPI and CPI numbers came out a little higher than had been anticipated. Now, these are not like blowout high numbers, but they are higher. And why are they important? Because, of course, as you guys know, inflation translates to interest rates, and interest rates translate to the market. There's only two things that affect the market consistently. I've told that a number of times. One is interest rates, the other one is taxation. Now, taxation is probably going to be benefiting from the Trump administration, and the hope had been that interest rates were also going to be coming down, because we've had these announcements of interest rates falling for the last couple of years. But if inflation is not going to be coming down as quickly as people had been hoping, in fact, it's going to be rising a little bit, as we're starting to see, then we are going to see an issue come through with regards to the ability of, the Fed, especially, and other central banks, to keep on cutting interest rates in the face of rising inflation. Especially when we've seen recently that jobs numbers in the US, for instance, are not that weak. So we have a reasonably strong economy. You have rising inflation. You cannot be cutting interest rates in that environment. So that is an important, thing to note. Trump, of course, wants to have lower interest rates, but that is not going to be something that he can just basically pull off without, the market or the economy cooperating with inflation coming down. And there's been a couple of things that have been hurting them. Something like, for some reason, the price of eggs has been a real, kind of almost has almost a symbolic, measure in the US at the moment. It was one of the kind of like the talking points that Trump used, the price of eggs, when he was basically campaigning against Biden and then Harris. Egg prices have risen significantly in the US. Why? Because there's a bird flu epidemic going around, and people have to kill those birds, those chickens, and therefore, obviously, the supply of eggs is under pressure, and therefore eggs are rising. But we have other factors as well, including the fact that we are starting to see, some impacts coming through with regards to fears around tariffs internationally. We are starting to see basically some difficulties coming through in some things that had good base effects before, that are now obviously, not going to be giving the same benefit going forward. So, for instance, let's just say that there's a price of something that was a limit from 5 to 10. Okay, huge increase. There's a huge inflation in 1 year. The next year, it basically stays the same. Stays at 10. Okay, There's no inflation coming from that. But the following year, then it goes to the normal rate of inflation increases, like going from like say 10 to like 11 or 12, 10, 20%. Not as bad as the inflation was in the past, but better than the base effect that it had from 10 to 10. You know what I mean? And so there were some of these things that had these huge increases post-COVID, that then had a period when they were basically flattish, which helped inflation come down, and now are resuming the normal progress up in terms of the price increases, and so obviously are inputting into inflation. Now, the one thing I would say makes me believe that inflation might not be as much of a problem as some fear is, number one, the tariffs that Trump usually is talking about is kind of what Trump says doesn't always come true. He has historically, and when we've said a number of times, being quite aggressive in terms of the claims he's had, but not being able to follow them up. And so it's quite possible that if he does see inflation come up, he does see real pushback come through, he might decide not to put some of these tariffs through, and that would be one good thing. The second thing is that another move that they've done this week, which is basically move to get the Ukraine-Russia war ended, that would be very positive for inflation, bringing inflation down. Why? If you can go and end the Ukraine-Russia war, that will make Russian oil available to the market again, Russian goods available to the market again, and a lot of commodities come from Russia. Also, a lot of commodities do come from Ukraine as well, and Ukraine has not been sanctioned, but basically trying to export stuff through a sea that's basically controlled by your enemy in the middle of a war is not a very easy thing to do. We could see, if this war ends, reasonably soon, Russian oil basically is going to be available very quickly. A lot of stuff that's basically stopped them from producing has been things like, for instance, banning insurance on Russian ships that are transporting oil. And even with these measures, they still manage to get to places like India and China. They've been importing Russian oil. So in terms of the overall, the overall impact on the market, more oil obviously will bring prices down. The second thing is, of course, like I said, Ukraine is a big producer of things like food, and so we would expect, if we do see it enter the war, may not be as quick as what happens with Russia, but you would expect, over the next couple of years, there would be a positive effect on, general supply out there, and therefore bringing prices down because the Ukrainians returning to the market in a bigger way. And like I said, they have not been sanctioned, but of course, having lots of people being killed, having your economy go towards a war footing, having to basically export partially via a sea that's controlled by the enemy during this wartime period. These are all things that are very difficult to operate with. So that would be, I think, another positive. And so that combined with, like I said, the tariff thing may mean that we don't see inflation being as big a deal as had been basically anticipated. That being said, if you look at the market overall, the market is pricing not a zero chance anymore of a rate hike coming through towards maybe the second half of this year. That is a dangerous place to be in. I do think that if we do see an unexpected rate hike at the end of this year, we could see a lot of things pull back, especially some of these stocks that have gone very frothy, things like the Magnificent Seven, etc. Tech stocks. I mean, you're spending basically $80 billion on future growth, and interest rates start to rise. That $80 billion could generate a lot of money right now if you just put in a bank and earning you, 5% in the bank, so there has to be a justification for that. So I do think that it's going to be a tough period for the market if we do see, inflation basically continues to remain sticky, and like I said, the possibility of a rate hike coming through end of the year, early next year. Next, let's look at the AI segments. So first, Grok 3. Grok 3, according to Elon Musk, scary smart, the words he used. When it comes out, I fully expect it to be the best product in the market. It can't just be the best product in the market. It can't be an improvement that's like the kind of improvements we've been seeing for the last year or so. Because Grok 3 is going to be the next generation of model. It was the biggest biggest cluster, computer cluster ever used in a single cluster trainer model. Google has bigger clusters. If you look at them as individual clusters combined, so they have places in like the US where they have these systems like 30 Ks apart, which is not that far apart if you're looking at fiber optics and so on. But in terms of one single unit, in like one location, the Grok has the biggest one, and since it's going to be the first one trained on the next generation computers with the next level of computing power, etc., and hopefully with the next level of algorithms and whatnot, it needs to be a significant improvement. If Grok is not a significant improvement over what's gone before, this would be a huge disappointment for XAI, Elon Musk AI company. I wouldn't say it would be the end of AI, because Grok started from like nothing and came to a very comparable level relatively quickly, but it has not been the cutting edge model at any point in time. If, however, the OpenAI model, next one that comes out, is not at a level where people are blown away by it, then I think that you will have a problem, because they are considered to be up there. I would put OpenAI and Google as the two main levels, even though I'll give Google the edge on that. Google's problem is not so much basically the ability to do stuff, is the fact that the internal dynamics of that company make it very difficult to get really good products out to the market. So next couple of weeks we're going to get Grok 3. Let us see what it costs is. Let us see what the improvement is going to be. But I fully expect that to be, at least until we see what comes up from OpenAI, etc., the best model on the market. And like I said, possibly the best model by a long shot. So there should be no easy competition. However, once Grok 3 does come out, the timeline, the clock starts ticking on OpenAI. They are not going to be able to basically delay for several months afterwards. If Grok 3 comes out, they need to have something out in the next few weeks afterwards, not in the next few months afterwards. Because, what's going to be happening is people are going to be using these models to do things like, new. And if they spend 2-3 months doing these new things with Grok, maybe an OpenAI comes up with a new model and wants them to basically pay another $200 a month for this thing, they might not be saying yes to it. So yeah, I do fully expect Grok 3 to come out next couple of weeks and to be the best model when it does come out. Next, there was, like I said, a speech by J.D. Vance at which was a safety conference attended by obviously some of the biggest people out there in terms of political scene, people like Macron, etc. Were there. And in it, he basically went out and gave a very optimistic view about AI, including saying things like AI will never replace human jobs. I don't know how he gets that. And saying that, more importantly, in terms of the impact on the market, that the US is going to fight for an open, aggressive AI approach, including pushing back on things like the European Union's safety rules. He mentioned the fact that, it's one thing to basically protect children on the internet, but it's another thing to prevent a grown person from accessing opinions that you don't like. And I think that this thing, or this kind of approach that he's putting out there, is relatively different from what the Biden administration was doing. The Biden administration was using European and other countries' rules to basically censor the internet in the US because of the fact that they were not able to do that due to the First Amendment rights that Americans have. Vance and Trump are looking at it from the opposite direction. They're going to use their power to reduce the censorship that we are seeing in places like the EU, etc. And it does such censorship that, in terms of can't say bad things on the internet. There's also safety issues. For instance, the UK came out recently, it was announced recently, though it was not confirmed, because apparently confirming it that you've been asked to do this thing by the company would be committing a crime in itself. So the government can ask you to do something, and if you can say the government asked me to do this thing, that alone is enough to be a crime. So the UK wants Apple to open up encryption services, or encryption, towards algorithm to UK inspection, not just in the UK, but for all Apple phones anywhere in the world. Apple, of course, is pushing back on this thing, and if it was just Apple facing the UK, it might lose, because the UK will probably be able to team up with the EU, even though Brexit occurred, and that's 500 plus million people. You can't be avoiding that kind of market of 500 plus million of some of the richest people in the world. The European Union may have problems, but it's still a very rich place. I mean, nothing is that rich and that big, other than the US. Okay, so it's a huge market to give up, and so obviously that would be quite a big detriment to them. But that's just Apple versus the UK. The US plus Apple versus the UK, that's a very different story. Like we mentioned, the UK is looking for a trade deal with the US. The UK is fearful about sanctions from the US, and so is Europe. That is a lot more power to be on Apple's side than just Apple alone. And so I do think that those kind of moves are going to be felt around the world. We are seeing already, for instance, part of the reason that Trump is going against South Africa is because they're not letting Starlink come to the country. Truthfully, Starlink, can't go to the country because it doesn't have a B, percentage ownership. It's not BE compliant, and to be in certain sectors in South Africa, for instance, like telecommunications, you have to have a certain proportion of BE compliance. Starlink says no. Africa says no. If you're not get it, then we're not letting you in. And then Trump, of course, is stepping in to help out Elon Musk. I think that is an important factor to look at, because not only is it about, for instance, Trump and the US that's looking at this from a point of view of using power and threatening and so on. We're starting to see signs that other parts of the world, like for instance the Canadian Christine Freeland, who was Justin Trudeau's second in command effectively until she stabbed him in the back and basically was the reason that he resigned. She's come out and said that if she gets elected into office, she's going to put 100% tariff on Tesla as a way to pressure Trump. And if we do see something like that happen between the US and Canada as well, maybe the European Union and Canada as well, where people are focused on things like Tesla and Starlink and so on, it would not obviously end up as Tesla losing out. The reason being is that one thing Trump has shown, despite the fact, like I said, he is not great when it comes to keeping his promises, is that he does not like to be slighted. One of the reasons he's president is because Barack Obama made fun of him and kind of damages his ego. If Canada and the European Union do something like that, similar to Tesla, it might take it as an insult to himself, and that might be one of the things that triggers a trade war. Okay, that's obviously going down the rabbit hole a little bit, but just be aware of that. We are seeing the US now taking a very different role in the tech sector, supporting US tech that was not there in the last, basically, administration from the Biden administration. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to speaking to you guys next week. Cheers.